This is Desmond Child, and I'm back again on my weekly mixtape with Brian Colburn to talk about more songs from throughout my career. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to My Weekly Mixtape, a podcast that takes the classic mixtape approach to building a modern playlist. I'm your host, Brian Colburn. Tonight, I'm beyond excited to welcome back to the show one of my favorite songwriters on the planet, the one and only Desmond Child. Desmond, it's a pleasure to have you back on the program, sir.
Oh, it's great to be here.
Now, back on episode 54, you and I dove into a lot of songs from your arsenal of chart-topping hits, and we also talked a lot about your memoir, Living on a Prayer, Big Songs, Big Life. Tonight, we're going to continue that dive into more songs from your incredible songwriting career, as well as discuss the new audiobook of Big Songs, Big Life, which is out now. The first thing I want to do is congratulate you, as 4 of the songs you've written and co-written, that being Bon Jovi's You Give Love a Bad Name and Living on a Prayer, as well as Kiss's I Was Made for Loving You and Ava Max's Kings and Queens, have all reached over 1 billion streams on Spotify. So congratulations on those 4 milestones.
Thank you. I love being a billionaire.
Well, starting with Bon Jovi's You Give Love a Bad Name, since we didn't get a chance to talk about that song on Volume 1, can you maybe dive into the songwriting origins for that song and its connection to another song you wrote, which was Bonnie Tyler's If You Were a Woman and I Was a Man?
Yes, I had gotten a call from Bonnie Tyler's producer, Jim Steinman, and he was a friend of my manager, Winston Simone, and he had just had a huge hit with Bonnie Tyler, Total Eclipse of the Heart. And he was looking for material for her next record. And so I had sent over a song called Lovers Again, which he loved, and recorded with her. And then said, I'd like you to write me a specially written song. First of all, the theme has to be about androgyny. Okay, he came to the right place. And the thing is, he says, I want the verses to sound like Tina Turner. I want the B section to sound like Hall & Oates or the Police. And then I want the chorus to sound like Bruce Springsteen. And I said, okay. And so I went right to work. And, within 24 hours, I had come up with If You Were a Woman, I Was a Man, which he recorded with her. The thing is that right at that time, there was this kind of change at her record company, at Sony. There was a new regime, and kind of all the British stars were kind of getting short shrifted. And so they didn't get the same promotion that they were getting before. I mean, I'm talking about huge stars, like Neil Diamond, Barbra Streisand, Bruce Springsteen, the Eurythmics, Culture Club, Cyndi Lauper. It was a change that happened, and they weren't using those kind of promotional dollars on someone like Bonnie Tyler. And it's a shame because, she's one of the greatest rock singers of all time. And so what was happening then, so that song was released and it was popular in France only. And so I really thought I had like a number 1 song there for her. And so, a year went by and I was kind of mad. It's almost like I wasted a song, that could have been a global smash. And so I went to write I had solely written that song. So I went to co-write with John Bon Jovi and Richie Sambora. And the very first day that I went to meet with them, I had a title in my pocket called You Give Love a Bad Name. And as soon as I said the title, John finally looked up and looked at me and gave me that $1 billion smile. And so I said, I also have a hook that I used in another song that didn't make it. It was like a stillborn. And so I kind of started playing that melody with those chords. And, very quickly, if you were a woman and I was a man, would it be so hard to understand? And then it became shot through the heart and you're to blame, darling. You give love a bad name. It was cut from really the same bolt that Because the Night was, because it had the similar chord structure. It's like, but our melody went up and Because the Night went down. Because the night belonged to lovers, because the night, if you're a woman, I mean, it's like, it was the Jersey sound, right? And so they really took to that. And also, I had been obsessed with two songs around that time. One was Billie Jean by Michael Jackson, and the other one was These Dreams Are Made of This by the Eurythmics. And they both had the very similar undulating bass line that I also used on Bonnie Tyler's song, it was the same thing. And I was playing it for Richie, and he said, that sounds like Michael Jackson. We can't do that. And I said, we're a rock band. I said, no, listen, man, just play it chug it on guitar, like chun 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 chun. Right? So then we went chun 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 chun, and the song just came to life. But it, was the kind of sister brother of If You Were a Woman, I Was a Man. So that opened the door because they went beyond the Call of Duty, producing that with Bruce Fairburn, the incredible producer in Vancouver, and Bob Rock was the engineer. And they also did Living on a Prayer, all for this album called Slippery When Wet, which is now, I think we're coming to is it already the 40th anniversary? I don't know.
It will be in a few short years.
But the album just made Bon Jovi the biggest stars in all the world. So then after that, in more recent times, the original song, If You Were a Woman and I Was a Man, was interpolated by Ava Max. If all of the kings put their queens on the throne, we would pop champagne and make a toast. It's the same chords, the same melody, same everything. So, of course, they came to me and I became a co-writer on that song.
Awesome. Well, between my years of radio as well as playing in cover bands myself, I can't count the number of times someone's come up to me and saying, hey, could you play Shot Through the Heart by Bon Jovi? And I know they clearly meant You Give Love a Bad Name, since a lot of people had no idea at the time that Shot Through the Heart was a completely different song from the band's 1984 self-titled album. Yeah. Growing up, I had heard the first two Bon Jovi albums because of my older cousins who were into the band being from New Jersey. I simply assumed that the Shot Through the Heart lyrics in Bad Name were a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, if you know, callback to that first album. Was that the case?
Well, no, I think for him, it was more like he threw it in saying, I know this is a great hook, Shot Through the Heart. And so he had said, that I wrote a song with that title, but I want to use it in this song. So, it's like we were finding, bits and pieces from different songs, that we had written and just made, kind of Bride of Frankenstein.
Another example of that was the double callback in Aerosmith's classic What It Takes from 1989's Pump. The line, girl, before I met you, I was F-I-N-E fine, but your love made me a prisoner. Yeah, my heart's been doing time. Calls back.
Which I co-wrote both, Fine and Heart's Doing Time.
Yes. Now, since What It Takes was the closing song on Pump, was that lyrical section meant to be kind of the stamp at the end of like the Permanent Vacation / Pump era?
I think you're thinking too deeply into it.
I have a tendency to do that.
Yeah. That would be so cool. Like, a Paul is dead kind of like theory, with it. But no, I think it was just one of those things, it was just another song. And Stephen likes to, repeat certain things. Like he always is going, when he can't think of lyrics, he always goes, yabba dabba 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 dabba, like that. Like, and so my nickname for him is Yabba Dabba, Yabba Dabba Doo, and like yes. Fred Flintstone, right? Mm-hmm. And so I remember he was once trying to, like we wrote a couple of songs and he was trying to throw in the line, "My paycheck swallowed a trout." And it was like, what? My paycheck swallowed a trout. What does that mean? And he said, I just think it sounds cool. And then, ultimately he put that in a song that he co-wrote with somebody else, and I said, there it is. There it goes. My paycheck swallowed a trout. What is that?
Well, having written dozens of songs with both Bon Jovi and Aerosmith, are there any songs that maybe weren't released as singles, album tracks, if you will, that you look back and wonder why the song wasn't released as a single? Because for me personally, when I hear tracks like Bon Jovi's Blood on Blood from New Jersey or Aerosmith's Ain't That a Bitch from 9 Lives, I immediately think, how were these not hit singles on the radio?
I don't know. It's like one of those things, certain songs take priority and then the promotional dollars run out or their wick of promotion runs out. I mean, I got so lucky with Waking Up in Vegas because I co-wrote that with Katy Perry and Andreas Carlson. She was between record deals. She had been in The Matrix as the lead singer there. And then right before she got a deal at Columbia Records with Steve Greenberg, one of our great friends. So we wrote Waking Up in Vegas. And so she went on to Columbia, and that was the lead song that would have been her first single. But then Steve Greenberg got fired from Columbia, and they let go of his 3 acts. Want to hear who they were?
Yeah, of course.
Fountains of Wayne, Katy Perry, and the Jonas Brothers.
Wow.
They just cut those 3 bands loose. And so, of course, she went on to, I think, RCA and had a magnificent career there. And so that's when she got in there, she started working with Max Martin and his team. And they came up with unbelievable songs like, oh my God, what was the first one? I Kissed a Girl.
I Kissed a Girl, yes.
And then Hot and Cold. It was 3 number ones in a row. And Waking Up in Vegas was down, of course, down, down, down. And I said, oh my God, that's a number 1 song too. And finally, they released it as the 4th single and it goes all the way to number 1. But the dumbest thing that happened was there was a movie called The Hangover. Mm-hmm. And I was trying to submit songs for it. And then I felt like, okay, Waking Up in Vegas is the best song for this. And some dumb music supervisor said, no, man, it's got to be all male songs because it's all guys and thing. I said, but don't they have girlfriends? No, man, it can't be any women on this soundtrack. And I said, but this is going to be a number 1 song with Katy Perry. Put it in your movie. They came out at the same time. They were both, the movie and the song were hit shows, The Hangover, my God. But Waking Up in Vegas was made for that movie. And it was how dumb is that? Because then the cross promotion would have been fantastic on a global scale. Yeah. But, what can I do? I can't control everything. But I can't complain that I also didn't lose because it became number 1 anyway.
There you go. And while we were talking about Aerosmith, on episode 54, you and I talked about Dude Looks Like a Lady and Angel from Permanent Vacation. But I'd like to talk about another song you wrote during those sessions, which was their future smash hit, Crazy. Even though it was written during the Permanent Vacation cycle, it was held through the Pump cycle and then finally released on Get a Grip. And I've read that the band did that so they could quote unquote spread out their ballads. From your knowledge, was that actually the case there?
Maybe. I mean, Steven always had this kind of slight resentment that people like me and Diane Warren were pop writers, kind of entering the sacred circle of rock, that they feel they lived in and we did not. And the biggest song they ever did was I Don't Want to Miss a Thing. They weren't able to do a show without that song, and it came from a movie. And that's how they justified in their head. They were not co-writers on it. It was all Diane Warren. That song should have won the Oscar, but some Disney ditty, they outspent whatever, and she didn't get it. She still has it. She's on her 16th Oscar nomination. And even Steven was kind of slagging her a little bit in People magazine, just well, she's a pop writer, whatever, we just did it for the movie. I mean, it's not our kind of music. I mean, and so, when I came into the picture, they had done an album called Done with Mirrors.
Yes.
And it was, received kind of disappointingly. And so John Claudner, their epic A&R guy, forced me into their circle. They didn't want it. And, the very first day that I met them, we wrote Dude Looks Like a Lady. But even then, Steven, in his autobiography, was slagging me, saying, well, he didn't really write anything on it. Maybe just a few little words. I don't even know why his name's on it, and he described me. Well, I actually looked more like what he described me. He said he walked in there with a mustache that looked like Juan Valdez, which was kind of like an insult to Latinos because I am Cuban, but I never had it. Okay, I have a goatee right now, but I never sported a 70s porn mustache, okay, on its own, And so then Joe, in his autobiography that was co-written by my co-author, David Ritz, before I started my book, said, oh, well, Desmond came up with the title, Dude Looks Like a Lady. And it was like, I didn't. That was Steven's title. They both had it wrong. And so I was like, So in my book, I set the record straight. And then Steven came over to my office a couple of years ago, and I sat him down and said, okay, look, this is how it went down, right? And he looked off into space and he said, yeah, I like your story better than mine. So as far as delaying, I mean, I thought that Crying and Crazy were too similar. They shouldn't have been on the same record, but they were. And they both were hits. What can I tell you? Crying, crazy. I mean, exactly. What could I do?
Yeah.
I was happy I got on the record. And I was happy it was also a hit.
By all means. Well, I want to dive into some of these rock songs that you have worked on. And the first one I want to touch on is Alice Cooper's Poison, the hit track written by you, Alice, and John McCurry. Now, from my knowledge of the song, the opening guitar riff was originally written and used by John for the John Waite track Encircled. And I'd love to know how it was transformed into Poison during the songwriting process.
Well, Alice and I had already written the song Poison. And then in the studio while we were building the track, I said, oh, it'd be so cool if we had some kind of freaky, angular intro. And he said, oh, well, I got this. I didn't know it was, this is the first time I'm hearing it has anything to do with John Waite. The first time. I never heard that before. He didn't
Really?
say it, and no one's ever brought it up before. And it's cool in a way. But he came up with that riff, and the riff was so strong, we gave him co-writing credit on the song because it's so signature. We could not just say, oh, well, you're just a musician. Thank you very much. We couldn't do that.
That was a class act on both your parts then.
Yes. I mean, I'm not greedy like that. And I'm always a collaborator. So what's the difference? 2 collaborators, 3 collaborators, 8, or like on Kings and Queens, for some reason, I have 12 collaborators.
Yes. Well, let's shrink the collaborators down to a band and one other person, that band being Ratt and Arthur Payson, where you worked in 1990 on the band's Detonator album. Can you talk about that experience working with Ratt on hits like Lovin' You's a Dirty Job and Shame, Shame, Shame?
Now, was I a co-producer on that, or was I the executive producer on that album?
You were the executive producer. Apologies.
I don't know what happened because I was working on my own album, Discipline, and then they kind of asked me to come and produce that record. And I said, well, I have to promote my own record. which was like a 2-year operation. I wasn't successful, but, I was going to give it my last shot. I was already like 41 years old. So I wrote all the songs except for one of them. But I did, kind of tweak that song with them for the record. And it was a kind of difficult time for them because, King was going through a lot, and then he finally died. And so Arthur was my engineer, and Arthur had a family, they had moved to California when I did to continue working with me. So they were living in New York, and they lock, stock, and barrel moved to California. And then I was like, well, why doesn't Arthur be the producer and I'll be the executive producer? And so that's how we worked, because I wanted to make sure that Arthur was still being employed, because I felt, very responsible for his family moving there. And I was going to be out of commission for 2 years. So we did that with Kane Roberts. We did that with this New Jersey band that played a song of mine, Timeless Love, on the Shocker soundtrack.
Soraya, yes.
Kane Roberts, Ratt, and there was like another record. Oh, Mitch Malloy also. So that kept Arthur busy for the next 2 years, engineering and producing those records. And I was co-writing when I could and contributing songs, and then, kind of sometimes serving as an executive producer.
Well, we talked about your work with Joan Jett on Volume 1 at a little bit of a higher level, but I'd like to dive a little bit deeper into your work with her, as I Hate Myself for Loving You and Little Liar are two of my absolute favorite songs from across her discography. Having produced I Hate Myself, I've always wondered how Mick Taylor from the Rolling Stones came on board to play guitar solo on that track, and I'd love to hear what you felt he brought to the song.
Well, he brought his name and his credibility. And, that was important for her at that moment, for the press and to say, yeah, And so I think we had a solo on there by Ricky Burt, and then we switched it. And, it came out great. I mean, I think it sounds really wonderful. But, everybody would know he goes there. Everybody was just willing to do whatever it took to make Joan explode, because it was her time.
And I want to dive into that a little bit, because Little Liar was a song where Joan was being very open and raw and vulnerable in the track, which is a bit of a pivot from her Bad Reputation days. Was that something that you and her were looking to achieve with that song?
I don't, with Joan, she's an instinctual person. There wasn't a lot of intellectual talking about ideas. It was just like the song just kind of wrote itself in a way. And I'm sure that she had had experiences in her life that she related to the lyric, but of course I knew nothing about her personal life. And so, usually I can get all the artists I work with to be little chatty Cathys and tell me everything, because I usually I'm writing, surreptitiously writing down what they're saying. And then when we finally get around to the songwriting, I said, well, when you were talking, you said this line. It's like, okay, did I? Okay. And so that always can open a door into a kind of more authentic lyric. But Joan is very mysterious person. I saw her recently at the Ryman, got to see her again since 2000. I hadn't seen her in person since 2008, when I was inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame, and she inducted me. And so she was so gracious, and she wrote the most beautiful introductory speech. So I hadn't seen her since then. And it was just so wonderful to see her on stage. And, she looked like she was 16 years old. I mean, she just looked fantastic. Her body's incredible, her movements, and just the way she spoke to the audience was very giving and funny. And it was a spectacular show. So I just adore her. And we were so kind of lucky too that it was originally Monday Night Football, and then they became Sunday Night Football. And so I worked on interpolating those lyrics into, Can't Wait for Sunday Night, or whatever it turned out to be, right?
Waiting all day for Sunday night.
For Sunday night. Yeah, waiting all day for Sunday night. And so that song was sung by Faith Hill, Pink, Carrie Underwood. And then Carrie decided to write her own theme, and it lasted a couple of years. And then by popular demand, it went back to the other theme, And so then just last year, Dolly Parton recorded the song featuring Joan Jett. And so I got a call from Dolly's office that she's got a gold plaque waiting for me over there for me to pick up. So I'm hoping it can work out that I could, I can have a picture of her handing it to me. But we talked a little bit about Dolly, me and Joan backstage, and she a wonderful. She felt working with her. I mean, that's a real star, like Dolly Parton, and the good kind. So generous, so humble, and self-effacing, and she doesn't take herself so seriously, which she always makes people feel good and comfortable. And she's also been a tremendous supporter of LGBTQ rights, and in kind of a Southern world where it's been going in the opposite direction. So it's wonderful that somebody of her stature is handing out hope, putting out hope out there for young LGBTQ kids that look up to her, they're in their small communities and afraid to come out, or, just feel like outcasts. And she just brings them all in. And I just love that about her.
And that's why Dolly's a national treasure. Well, with all of the news of Mike Portnoy being back in the Dream Theater fold and their upcoming album and tour, I'd like to touch on the song you co-wrote with the band in 1997, You Not Me, for their Falling Into Infinity album. Was that your first foray into writing progressive rock? And what did you take away from that experience?
Well, it was kind of weird because I just wrote with him and it was just me and him. So then he goes away, and then the management comes back and says, okay, well, Desmond's a co-writer with the whole band. It's like, no, I'm not. I co-wrote it with him 50-50. And so we struggled for that for a long time. I don't know what the credits say, but, I got half the song because I did my work, and so sometimes bands are weird like that, where, the other members who aren't writers want credit because that's their income. See? So, I mean, I think that, Aerosmith worked it out the best because it's like Steven and Joe are the main writers. Sometimes they're collaborating with other people separately, like Joe wrote Hearts on Time with me, and Steven wrote Angel with me without Joe. But the other members of the band had an equal piece of the publishing because of their musical contributions. But, fighting, over, pieces of songs, is terrible because it's business. Maybe you could say, okay, the publishing is business, but the songwriting, that's different, because why take credit for something that you didn't do just to get a piece of something so that you get more money? And it's always because the lead singer usually is writing the songs, and then usually with the other star, which is the lead guitarist. And so that's what happened with Dream Theater. And so he never came back to write more, maybe because it was kind of, I didn't do what they said, what they wanted. And, it was like one of those things where, I mean, it wasn't even in my world, and they sought me out. Just maybe he did just because he thought, well, why not? But we did come up with a good song,
That's
so
a great song. Yeah.
That's that. And it's a shame that we didn't continue our writing relationship over a business matter. But if you're going to do something like that, you have to say it up front. And I would have said, okay, well, look, if you want to split the credit, fine. But guess what? I sell 50 and you split your 50 with them. Like I said, Aerosmith did it the best because they all shared on the publishing side.
Well, I would certainly catch flack from the My Weekly Mixtape Kiss fans if we didn't touch on a few more songs that you co-wrote with them. And I'd like to take a look at the pair of singles you worked with the band on their 1988 compilation, Smashes, Thrashes, and Hits, the songs Let's Put the X in Sex and You Make Me Rock Hard, the latter of which was co-written with Diane Warren, someone we talked about earlier. Now, Paul Stanley recorded both of those tracks on his own in 1988. Were those songs written with the Smashes, Thrashes, and Hits track listing in mind? Because a lot of the songs on that compilation kind of pull from that same vein and that same mindset, even some of the songs they remixed from the earlier albums.
Wow, you know more than me. I have no idea what you're talking about.
I'm a big music nerd, sorry.
Well, somebody's got to be. I never thought that deeply into it. And Let's Put the X in Sex. You know, I just love that song. And You Make Me Rock Hard. It was funny because I dragged Diane Warren into it and she didn't even want to do the session. You know, I said, come on, Diane, you can do this. It's Kiss. I don't know anything about rock music. What are you talking about? Come on. And so we had coffee before we went into the session. I said, well, let's walk in with a title. And, you know, we came up with You Make Me Rock Hard, which is a double entendre.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you make me rock hard or rock hard, you know. But we said it like, let's just throw out there as a joke, as, you know, an icebreaker. And Paul looked at us and said, I like that. And we looked at each other like, you're kidding me. That's like one of the worst titles ever written. And so, you know, it was kind of a novelty song. It's like a joke because it's like so overtly sexual, but, you know, it worked. And, you know, there was another song like that Paul and I had written, I think with, I'm not quite sure, it was either Jean Beauvoir or the guitarist. It's called All Night.
Jean Beauvoir, yes.
When you work all day, and you got all night. I mean, that's like very, very sexual. And then who did we write Reason to Live with? Because that's really my favorite Kiss song. Was that just me and Paul?
As far as I know, yes.
Because that's like my favorite Kiss song.
It's a great tune. Now, I do want to pivot to something a little bit outside of rock here. And this is because earlier this year, you had some co-writing sessions with the man responsible for writing the first song that I, as a child, ever fell in love with. And it's my favorite song of all time, that being Rainbow Connection, with the writer being Paul Williams. Seeing you two combine forces on a song or maybe songs, it immediately piqued my interest. And I'd love to know, is there anything you'd maybe willing to share about those writing sessions?
Well, that came up because we auctioned, you know, writing a song for the ASCAP Foundation. And so I had a fundraiser at our New York apartment and, you know, we auctioned off this songwriting session and we wrote a song called Freedom is the Dance. And it's such a beautiful song. And the person who bought the session, I mean, they're not co-writers or own the song or anything, but they donated big money so that we would write this song. And he wanted it to have a theme about being an immigrant coming to this country because he came here from the Philippines. There's two versions of the song. The one that's more kind of about that story. And then we wrote a second version that was just more like the rest of the song. And so we said, okay, well, we're going to have to do it again for the next ASCAP Foundation auction. And I said, okay, great. But I want to write a song for Barbra Streisand with you, you know? So we'll see what happens with that.
Well, I'm not sure many people know this. And if you thought I was a nerd before, this certainly isn't going to help my cause in any way, shape, or form. But you, like Paul Williams, have also written a song for the one and only Kermit the Frog, as you co-wrote the track Everyone Matters with David Sigerson for It's a Very Merry Muppet Christmas Movie in 2002, with that song receiving an Emmy nomination for Outstanding Music and Lyrics. Is there a different mindset involved when you write a song for a quote-unquote character such as Kermit the Frog, versus when you write with or for a band or artist?
Well, no. I mean, we had the storyline, and there was a moment in the show where he sings this song, and it just came to us to write a song called Everyone Matters. And it was a very profound song, because if you just think about what those words are saying, so many people don't matter, to the world. And we're saying everyone matters. Everyone has a soul, and everyone, deserves respect.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I was so pleased that we got it. I got my first Emmy nomination for writing that song. And it was very cute because Jim Henson had already passed away. So the guy that took over his voice came to the studio in Miami, long, straight, long hair, like real hippie type. And he got behind the mic. And that was the only time ever that our studio, which was very small, got packed. Like 50 people came to see that session. Like the word went out, and everybody from down the street, the other studios, they all came running to hear him sing it. And it was like amazing how he just like got in front of the mic. Okay, everything okay. And then he kind of did a little cough, and then he went into the Kermit voice. And it was like, wow, it was like goosebumps how it came to life. But he told us a sweet story. He said that he had gone to Royal Albert Hall for a command performance of the Queen of England, and lined up on the stage were all the people that performed that night. Sir Paul McCartney, Sir Rod Stewart, all these people were all lined up, the biggest stars of all time. And Kermit was there, and he was on somebody's shoulder, right? And so she's walking by kind of coldly, kind of like nodding her head. And then she stops, looks at Kermit and says, "And you're here too." Like she became like a little girl. How cute is that?
That's amazing.
Totally broke her spell of being the monarch, and she became a little girl. I just love that story so much.
Well, tonight we've been talking about songs you've written for and with other artists and characters, but I'd like to take a moment to talk about a song you wrote for yourself, because Desmond Child and Rouge's new single, Unpredictable, dropped earlier this year. Was there ever a should I pass this on to another artist or keep it for myself moment for you when you were writing this track?
Well, Desmond Child and Rouge, we started performing again, at different tributes to Laura Nyro, who was our biggest influence and idol. And everyone said, "Oh, you guys are so great. Why did you do more stuff?" So I did a solo show at Lincoln Center, and they came on and we sang a couple of Laura Nyro songs. And we just said, well, let's start making records again. No pressure, no nothing. And we did Unpredictable. We have 2 more already in the can. And we're also working on a Laura Nyro tribute album. We have 4 songs recorded. And it's hard because everybody lives somewhere different. Miriam lives in upstate New York. I live in Nashville. Maria Vidal lives in California. And Diana Griselli lives in the western part of Virginia, the state of Virginia. And, we kind of, for the Laura Nyro thing, everybody showed up from all corners of the country. And we had my musical director, Katy Perry, learn all of Laura Nyro's piano parts, which are very, kind of complex, cool chords. And they sang in the middle of the room with baffles. I sang in a separate ISO booth, and the piano was in its own booth. And so we sang live. We sang, we had learned all the parts, and we sang like maybe 4 or 5 takes of each one of the songs. And so I've been putting that together. It just sounds fantastic hearing our voices. And of course, loving so much the music of Laura Nyro. So much so that I named my son Nyro.
There you have it.
There you go.
Love it.
NYRO.
That is amazing. Well, before I let you go, are you currently writing or co-writing any songs? I know you mentioned the project you're working on now, but stuff that maybe fans can expect to hear from you or from other artists in the very near future?
Well, I've been working on my Broadway musical with David Sigerson called Cuba Libre. And it's a true story of my family before and after the Cuban Revolution.
Wow.
My mother had two younger sisters who were very beautiful. They became the it girls of Havana in the late 50s and then into the revolution. And one of them became the mistress of the dictator, Fulgencio Batista. And the other one ended up being one of the lovers of Fidel Castro. So it's two sisters, two dictators, one island.
Wow. That sounds exciting.
So yeah. And it's very, very exciting. I've been working on songs for Barbra Streisand for her next record. It's a duet record. So I can't actually even say a title. I signed that NDA. I'm not allowed to say anything about anything. But, if people check in on my Instagram, Desmond.child, there's always, news and stuff I'm doing and snippets. And, a lot of it right now is for the release of my audiobook, which is so great because, you see here all these writing tapes that I've mixed in there where I'm creating Living La Vida Loca, with Draco Rosa. You hear the start of the song. Co-writing the very first day I met Joan Jett, I Hate Myself for Loving You. You hear us coming up with the ideas and talking back and forth. It's so exciting. And waking up in Vegas with Katy Perry and Andreas Carlson. We're playing that, hit me with your best shot guitar rhythm. Dun, 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 shut up and put your money. So, Eddie Schwartz had solely written Hit Me With Your Best Shot. And so I got to meet him many, many years later. And I said, oh, thank you for writing my hit. He laughed. I love using that line. I said it to Bruce Springsteen at the Music Cares. It is a tribute to John Bon Jovi. So yes. On one side of him was Bruce Springsteen. On the other side of him was Paul McCartney. So I said to Bruce, I said, oh, thank you for writing all of my hits. And he got a big laugh out of that because, basically, You Give Love a Bad Name, that chorus is Because the Night, kind of turned upside down. And then I went up to Paul McCartney and I said, I wanted to meet you because I wanted to let you know that your song, Obla Di Obla Da, is what gave me my name, Desmond. Desmond has a barrel in the marketplace. And the last line of the song is, Desmond stays at home and paints his pretty face. And at night, she's the singer in the band. Remember, because he was the singer in the band. And she and Molly would stay at home. But the she is talking about isn't Molly. The she's talking about is Desmond.
Yes.
After he paints his pretty face. And he looked at me and he said, the cutest thing, he said, I always wondered if people understood that Desmond was gay. And I said, I understood. And that's why I named myself Desmond. It was so, so cute. And so I gave him my phone and he shot the selfie of me and him together. How cool is that?
That is legendary.
Yeah. Like, how cool is that to be able to say photo by Paul McCartney?
Well, I, for one, look forward to hearing what's next for you. Living on a Prayer, Big Songs, Big Life is available now in audiobook form, or if you prefer to read the words yourself, in print as well. Desmond, once again, this has truly been an honor. Thank you so much for joining me again on My Weekly Mixtape.
Oh, thank you so much. It's an honor, and call me anytime.
And to those listening, remember, you can find My Weekly Mixtape on almost all the social media haunts at My Weekly Mixtape. You can also head to myweeklymixtape.com to check out the full catalog of My Weekly Mixtape episodes. And if you like what you're hearing on the show, you can help me out by either telling a friend, leaving the show a 5-star review wherever you're tuning in, or becoming a Patreon mixtaper at patreon.com/My Weekly Mixtape. There you can enjoy ad-free episodes of the show, become a future guest, chime in on future episode topics, and so much more. That's all for this week. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, enjoy the tunes.